Thanks for everyone for joining. I know this year's a little bit different startup week. Usually you're used to seeing us in person, but this week or this year we're doing everything virtual. We're really excited to talk to you about evolutionary psychology and how it works within digital marketing. I'm Nate. Uh, Below me in the screen is Derrick, and for the last couple of years we presented. I think what Derrick last year we presented on cultural impact within small businesses.
Right.
Still another thing that we really like, but this is probably one of our favorite topics.
Recently, there's a couple things going on why we thought this was worth presenting. There's something called the replication crisis in social psychology and psychology as it relates to persuasion and just what everyone used to think versus now. So sort of truisms and stuff that has gotten handed down um, is undergoing what's called the replication crisis, which is a lot of these studies that people have based their approaches on in psychology um, have been not replicated. And it's about 50% of the famous studies that have influenced marketing, influenced how people talk to one another. One of them is interesting. They had a study on if someone held a hot cup versus a cold cup, and when they met someone, they were more likely to say that person is warm or that person is cold and distant. And that made huge news because everyone thought, wow, like look at this holding a cup, either completely without conscious awareness bias someone to what they thought of. That thing got blown out of the water. It's never been replicated. And the guy wrote books on it, got famous on it. So evolutionary psychology is the process of looking at how we evolved structurally from the nervous system and the brain and how that underpins the vast majority of how we operate in the world. And so when you apply that understanding and these new theories that are all evidence-based to the world of digital marketing, you can find yourself to be much, much more successful. So that's why we want to share it today.
Oh yeah, it's fascinating to see how little control you have or how much it's really, the depths of your mind. It's not your conscious mind making these decisions. So,
Yep.
it was very shocking to me too. But let's get started.
Okay, so the very first claim that we want to put in front of you is these two statements. First, people don't think like they think they do, and people don't decide like we've decided they do. Okay, so take a second. That's a bold claim, and we're going to get into exactly why that's very, very important to how you decide to market your company or sell products or basically anything involving persuasion. Next slide, please. Okay, so the first thing we start with is how many decisions do we make in a day? So the first thing I'd like to ask the viewers to do is take a second, and you can jot it down or just hold it in your memory, but how many decisions do you think you make a day? Is it 20, 50, 10, 100? Um, okay, so everyone's got that number. Let's go to the next slide. We make 35,000 decisions a day. And the vast, vast majority of these are unconscious. And we have a picture of a car here to bring that point home. When you are driving, you are constantly deciding if that person's in front of you is too close, they're slowing down, what route to take. There's all these decisions, and the vast majority are below conscious awareness. If you ever driven somewhere and then didn't ended up at the wrong spot or had no, that's all unconscious processing. Those are all decisions that remain constantly. And when is the time that you actually pay attention, right? When there's danger present. If there's a cop, all of a sudden, that comes to awareness, or if there's an accident ahead or a red light changes and you have to make a decision, those are conscious decisions, but the vast majority are unconscious and they're being made all the time, every minute of every day.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, people's commutes might be a little different now from the bedroom to the home office, but you
Yeah.
think about how many times, 5 times a week, twice a day, you're basically doing the same drive every day. I couldn't tell you, exactly what happened unless there was, like you're saying, an accident. Maybe, someone ran at a red light. Otherwise, I can't tell you how many red lights I hit, green lights I hit, how many stop signs there were. It's all just becomes unconscious, right?
Okay, and this is just kind of a funny thing. Of course, we can make fast decisions once we've considered the vast majority of factors. And this is true. If you think about all of the things coming at you and all of the things you have to deal with, if your conscious mind had to make every one of those decisions, it would be literally impossible. And the trick here is that all these unconscious decisions that filter what gets brought up to conscious awareness is critical to getting your message through to people. This is where we start to tie in evolutionary psychology to explain and understand and utilize this. If you look here, humans have been evolving 6 billion years of evolution, and specific branch of humanity about 5 million. And as you can see here, we started without language. So language came very, very late, and then we see obviously the highest form of man, a woman. But this process took a long time, and for the vast majority of it, humans functioned without language, written or oral. If you go to the next slide, when you look at this, the primal mind is what we're going to refer to as that underneath the water iceberg. The unconscious is another term that's kind of loaded. So for purposes of this, we prefer primal mind because it functions very, very differently than the conscious mind. There's a really famous book called Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow. And it has another framework for thinking about this. So on the left, you have the primal mind. 95% of all decisions are made here. It's very fast, it's associative, and it's autopilot. And associative means it has a emotional imprint that it works off of. It doesn't work off of reason. And then the thinker mind, this is kind of comparing like a computer, which is the primal mind, to a calculator, which is the thinker mind. The thinker mind, it is slow, it's deliberate, and lazy is the term he uses. But what we want to think about is the primal mind wants the thinker mind to do as little work as possible. So lazy is perhaps that's Daniel Kahneman wrote the book. That's his term, but it is very deliberate and selective as to where it gets focused, and that is because of the primal mind, not because of the thinker mind. And it's also indecisive. If you've ever sort of analysis paralysis and thought yourself in circles, that's a tendency of the rational thinker mind. And to bring this point home, if we want to look at the two types of minds, you have this gorilla here, and then you have the thinker mind on the other side. Again, this is a better way to reflect how to think about the primal mind. It's very emotional, very fired up. It makes decisions not through thought, but through instinct. And then thinker mind, obviously the classic sculpture here. And to represent the actual power and the relationship between the two, let's go to the next slide. This is the sizing difference, right? The primal mind will win every single time it matches up against the thinker mind. If we look about it, does everyone know what's a healthy diet, relatively speaking? How many people eat a healthy way? Does everyone know actually, like, primal mind wins the day? Primal mind orients around sugar, right? Because through our evolution, sugar was a tremendously advantageous source of energy, quick, effective, and rare. And now it's present everywhere. And so what you have here is a primal mind is largely making decisions for us on what we eat and how we eat. And if there's a matchup, even if you are like strict to diet and have done a good job and you're really hungry, the primal mind will overpower the thinker mind, and the thinker mind is not even aware of it. Next slide.
Oh, okay. Yeah, now this is kind of the part that I really enjoy. So the primal mind is the gatekeeper, right? Think about any concept, idea, person, website, ad, anything that you see in a day, the primal mind is going to engage in with that first. So the whole process for what we're talking about today is how do we get past this gatekeeper and this, illustration or example, like a bouncer out of a club. How you want to get in, the primal mind is the bouncer. What are you going to do to get in there? Like we said, if you're this couple that's trying to get into the club that is your mind, to get past the primal mind, there's only a couple different ways you can get it based off of the research that we found. And we don't want to look like this guy where the idea or the concept is immediately rejected. So there's a couple different key phrases or ways that we can take advantage of getting in there, so that once we pass the primal mind, we can access the critical thinker. And then maybe we are one of those few decisions that are made in the day, are made for what we're trying to convince or persuade.
Yep. And one thing to add there, Nate, before you go ahead, is the not only do we want to get past the primal mind, right? If you could charge past the bouncer and get tossed out of the club, but what we want to do is not just get past him, but get on the VIP list so that when we enter the rational and thinking mind, we have exclusive seating, and we're brought in to that party inside the mind in the right way as a special VIP guest versus just another ordinary citizen.
No, that's a good clarification, because, like you said, you don't want to run in there just to get immediately thrown back out. That's not going to help your cause or your persuasion.
And Nate knows all about this through personal experience, and I may or may not have in my wild days, and in fact may have or may not have with Nate.
I'd like to say we look a little bit better than this guy, but yeah.
In our minds, at least.
So let's take a look at the 6 approaches. As you can see here, there's personal, visual, tangible, contrastable, memorable, and emotional. We could probably spend hours, if not days, talking about all 6 of these different methods, but what we want to talk about today is the visual way to get on the VIP list. So you can see here, instinct, emotion, and intellect are all kind of ways that you're going to get in there. We have some examples of ads and just different pieces of the visual imprint that's going to allow you to get past the primal mind. And then, as you've seen or heard, a picture's worth 1,000 words, but in this case, actually, an image is worth 1,000 words. You've probably experienced this, with first impressions, with things that you just see immediately. You, for some reason, inherently, you like or dislike it. That's the primal mind working, figuring out if you're even ready to take it to the next step, to consume text, consume different components rather than just the visual imprint that ad or product or whatever you're seeing is going to be influencing your mind. And this is just a good quote from CXL. It's one of our conversion platforms that we like using a lot. The old brain is visual, like we were saying, the primal brain, primal mind. Since humans cannot relay at the speed at which new brains process information, we're hardwired to make decisions that are mostly based on visual input. That's what we're talking about with, the primal mind working much quicker, faster, more often than the critical mind. By using visual stimuli, you ensure that you tap into the processing bias that the brain has developed over thousands, if not millions of years.
Yeah, and let me share my screen real quick, Nate. To make this point, we're actually gonna use what we are talking about. So how do we represent the visual aspect of that understanding? So 5 million years, 50,000 years ago, we developed words. So you have 5 million all functioning without it. And then you have got a little sliver here at the end, 50,000 for language. Right here, we have a website that is, talks about evolution and all kinds of different stuff. But this is a timeline here of 5 million years ago, all the way to modern time. Right here's us. So if you look back throughout this entire time, we're talking 5 million years ago. No language, no language, no language, no language. And right about here, we start to talk. Right? Really right about there.
Only a sliver, right, of that whole
Only a
timeline.
sliver. And, there could probably be a better image to represent this, but when you just, the aha moment when you get something, that's because it was represented usually visually. And the story actually often evokes visual imagery. That's why everyone loves to hear a story and why those are captivating and informative and persuasive most of all. Okay. Back to you, Nate.
So now we want to go through some examples of visual stimuli, right? Here's a great ad that we found. What's the first thing you see? Probably the awkward, the mask of the face on top, grimacing, and then the kid's delight. That's the first visual imprint I see. Then the lasagna. The text below isn't even really anything that you notice at first. But it's such a jarring image that brings in the attraction or the attention of your mind. Um, I don't know if I've ever been that happy about lasagna, but it's definitely a visual imprint, I would say, that brings your attention in and lets you into the club. The bouncer's going to let you in at that point.
Yeah, well, and as a parent, right, I know which one of those I want to see, and I have an association and a visceral impact by this image. It got my full attention immediately because I know which one I want out of my
Yeah.
children. If I have to buy 100 packs of that lasagna all
Yeah.
day.
Yeah. Let me know if that works out. um, Here's another one I love. Just take a second. You know, we've seen a lot of rockets going off to space recently. Most recently, the Mars landing, which was really cool. I watched that this last week. But it's a KFC commercial, or it's a KFC ad. They've replaced, the smoke and the cloud and the fire with some fried chicken. And I think this again is another great example of a visual imprint, right? It's at first you think there's nothing out of the normal, and then it snaps in your mind because you're seeing the difference. It's like one of those, what is the differences in these two pictures? Well, normally there isn't giant pieces of chicken underneath a rocket going into space. And Derek, you said something when you first saw this that kind of like gives you some
Yeah.
cognitive.
Yeah, you get so this actually whenever the primal mind has to figure something out, it gets an immediate boost of dopamine, right? Everyone's heard about dopamine. It's the neurotransmitter that gets us rewards us for progress and for results. And so whenever, like when Yoda talks is another example, whenever the mind has to kind of work at something a little bit, as soon as it clicks into place, there's a surge of dopamine. So this has two effects. One is the immediate visual imprint, and then as it sorts out, you get a hit of dopamine right on top of it. Very effective, as long as it's relatively easy to figure out. Is the only challenge, because I
Yeah,
hate it when I can't get the image to work or any of that stuff. Drives me crazy.
yeah,
So
it will work the opposite direction, right? If it's too confusing,
right,
frustrating.
yeah, we'll
Um,
show that.
and then after you get into this one, just the last thing is, it says hot and spicy. I would imagine, jet fuel, all of that analogy there kind of makes sense for this whole ad.
Yep.
This next slide is a good example of a website. Apple, you either hate them or love them. I unfortunately the only person on my team that is like anti-Apple, but
Mm.
this website is very clear, very visual, right? Very the different versions of the iPhone 12. There's no real stress on your mind to figure out what's going on here. It's very clean design.
Yep.
You know that.
There's an immediate visceral impact based on the colors, the space. Immediately something changes, right? And this is well documented, right? Skin temperature, um, all of these things activate, and this thing speaks without any words.
Now let's take an example of probably their main competitor,
This is
Android.
killing Nate, by the way,
This.
everybody. Absolutely killing him because he is a
Oh,
savage against Apple and cannot talk highly enough about the mighty Android.
this is my nightmare. This homepage is a nightmare to me. If you're just taking the visual imprint, I don't know what to think. There's red here, cautionary signs, no problems found. I don't really know what to see here, if it's positive or negative based off the visual stimuli, right? When I start looking at the text, it gives me information about what it really is. But in my mind, this is a far less uh, high performing homepage compared to Apple, right? Very clean, very clear on what you're supposed to be doing. Here, I unfortunately would rather buy an Apple than an Android if we were only basing off the home pages.
That's the first time I've ever heard that, and that's only for purposes of presentation.
Uh, this is my
Right?
nightmare. If anyone sees this, they can talk to me about Androids. Now here's another huge, huge visual stimulant, I would say, for an ad, just to soak that in for a lot because it's very, I would say, aggressive. The only white space in here are the actual where the headphones should be, and this is an ad for sound canceling headphones if you can't tell, if you have the two different characters yelling at you. But
Yeah.
what it does is it brings your attention in immediately.
Right. Right,
Um,
exactly. And the primal mind is wired to look for danger, right? That's one of its, and the visual is how it is primarily aware of danger, sometimes auditory. But if you look at this is arresting because it is immediately apparent that there's something antagonistic and threatening in your space, right? And so and then with the visual, the way it is laid out draws your attention to the next thing, and then you have the additional dopamine hit of figuring out where the headphones actually exist. So it is a great example, Nate, of triggering the primal mind. And you don't always want to lead with fear unless you can rapidly solve it, because that's like barging past the gatekeeper, right? You can get someone's attention if you threaten them, but when you discover it's a bullshit threat, then all of a sudden you're now mad and you get tossed out of the club angrily, and a negative brand association. So it's a risky play pulled off beautifully. And also, all political affiliations aside, this is simply to illustrate the power of the visual imprint.
yep. And the last thing I'll say is, we're just innately good at reading people's faces, right? And then there's a huge component of, contrast here. You have two people that I would say, based off the eyebrows, based off their obviously giant mouths being open, are angry, but then you have the person in the center of the ad that's like somehow calm and serene. I don't know if you've ever been around two angry people, but it's very hard to be that calm,
Yeah.
especially if you're in the middle.
Yeah, it's an interesting statistic about websites or pictures of human faces. When someone is scanning a website, they do eye tracking studies, which is just simply where do the eyes go and where do they linger when they're engaging in a website. And if this does not work on stock photos, but pictures of people and people's faces, especially, they'll spend 2.5 to 3 times as much on that versus the content of the page, so the actual writing. So pictures draw us in, and this is a great example because also on websites where an image of someone where they're looking. So if you have someone looking to the left and it's a real photo, and then you have like your message there or like the buy button there, that the human eye follows the eye of the person in the photo. So you have these caricatures attacking someone verbally, and then so it's drawing the eye straight to the sereneness, which is also something that has an immediate visual impact. And then you get the additional thing of figuring out it's headphones, and the headphones give me peace from danger. All very quickly done, all without words.
Yep. No, that's good points. I think that's a good segue kind of into our next slide, because we've touched briefly on a couple of our examples of ads that bring in that visual stimuli pretty quickly. But Derek, can you tell them a little bit more about
Yeah.
the impact of color? Because I know this is another favorite subject of yours.
Yeah. Yep.
Not that I've heard you talk about a lot or anything.
Yeah, right. Nate's going to tune out for a moment. But when we talk about visual imprint, it's not just pictures and it's not just icons. It's actually the colors themselves. And again, back to the replication crisis we talked about in the beginning, there's been a lot of color theory that is more theory than evidence based. But there are some very good and very decisive studies done on the impact of color. And the two of the most studied colors are red and blue. An example of how the color red affects us as humans, it makes us much better at processing details and paying attention. It's also a great color to wear to attract a mate. And the lift, if you have a color red in the background and you are doing a detailed task that requires follow through, you perform 30%, a little bit more than 30% better than any other color. So red has a real 1/3 more attention. Blue has a much different, it is a calming, sort of a centering color, and it is something that when you want to establish trust. So when you see blue, there is a high degree of trust associated in our primal primitive mind. And this is why some of the big brands that want to project stability use that color. And the theory is, now this is just a theory that they haven't fully proven, but if you look back to our how we evolved, if you saw blue, especially sky blue, has the most pronounced effect. Sky blue means safety, right? If it's not stormy, it's not. So there's an innate association with this color. And green actually is another one that has a high, it actually impacts creativity. So you get that same, like red actually decreases creativity, green increases it by a significant margin, similar to how red lifts you towards detail. So, and again, what does green mean in our past, our ancestral past? It means that it's green pastures, things, there's growth, there's food. And so understanding some of these primal orders, you can use these things to in all your work on digital, because we control that environment and can use these ideas to promote your stuff.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I think, I doubt anyone anywhere would want to willingly do this test, but I think if stop signs were blue and not red, I could see a lot more people running
Yeah,
stop signs.
yeah, right. Well, for me, with like the 16 speeding tickets, no joke, I've gotten throughout my life. I think they are. I just flip the color in my mind.
You're
So,
just colorblind. Maybe you just
yeah,
never knew you
right.
were colorblind.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
But let's take a look at a couple ads that at least really use some color psychology, right? Here's one for McDonald's for their free Wi-Fi, cleverly using their various fries. I think this is all the fries you get if you order a small, but the red is just so prominent, and it's interesting to think about. McDonald's always uses red. You start thinking about all the different fast food industry restaurants, Wendy's, KFC, they're prominently red. Why is that? You're driving down the street, you want to see their ad, you want to see their sign. Just like Derrick was mentioning, it brings more attention to yourself. That's what they're trying to do when they're using all these colors, especially red. Another one that I thought was kind of funny was, again, another fast food example is KFC, just all red. It's, you know, for me, before learning all about the different psychologies of color, I just thought that red was just somehow the most common color or something like that. But it really turns out that there's a heavy amount of psychology and research involved when these different fast food restaurants that are really trying to get as much attention as possible want to use red. And that pulls you in way before you have to read any of this text. I think it's kind of funny because that KFC's they mixed around their their letters because this is from an ad when they ran out of chicken. How does a chicken restaurant run out of chicken? I don't know. Um, but it's all really fascinating to me. And the last thing we have on red is this kind of cool description of all these different brands that want to use red, what it triggers, are all similar things that Derrick had to say. But can also be found in different areas within marketing.
Yeah, and free tip, right? Again, if you're in the market and you want to attract a mate, red is a fantastic color for these exact same reasons, and that was both true of men and women, right? So anyone who wears the color um, produces a signal that it literally will raise blood pressure and heart rate. So, and that's a sign of excitement, and that then activates the primal mind, and it's associative. Remember from the beginning, so very very powerful.
Yep. And one thing I also think is funny is the pulse racing, which is why it's, synonymous with fast cars. There is those statistics that people that drive red vehicles, I don't think Derrick has a red car, but he still had no trouble getting tickets.
Yeah,
They just get more speeding tickets because it's based on the visual cues. They assume they're going fast. It's more eye catching than a black or a white vehicle.
yeah, and actually the vehicle that gets pulled over the least, because I did study this because I was considering buying it, is actually a black pickup truck. Black is another color. It's power and authority, and that has good evidence again beside it. So it's a little different than blue, but if you want to look powerful and like an authority, black is the best color to wear. And apparently, I'm not sure why a pickup truck, beats cars, but apparently that is the least pulled over vehicle, all else being equal. Pretty fascinating.
It's great advice for anyone buying a new vehicle.
Yeah.
Right? Consider a
Yeah.
black truck.
Yep.
So now, we've shown you a lot of different examples of compelling ads, some color psychology as well. Some people tend to take this advice the wrong way. They're like, all right, I'm just going to load things up with visual cues, make sure people see it immediately. Um, there's another aspect to be considered, which is the cognitive load. How many things can your mind truly take in right now? Take a look at this ad. I think it's from a newsletter or an email drip campaign. They had the idea of doing all visual cues for the most part, right? A lot of imagery, a lot of big headers. But to me, I don't know where I'm looking at. Is it the books for reading? Is it the little iPad thing? Is it the coupon on the bottom? Is it the coupons on the right? There's like probably 7 or 8 different things you could do easily based off of this one page, one image. I mean, where does your eye draw to in this, Derek?
I mean, all over. It zigzags all over, right? So definitely not a clear, not like the Apple homepage, right?
No, it's I think Derek mentioned earlier, perhaps a good example of analysis paralysis, right? You're looking at all these different things rather than trying to decide what decision you're going to make, you're just not going to make any.
Right.
Um, Another example is kind of what Yahoo used to look like. Their web page looks a little bit better now, but this is a million different things. I mean, they're trying to be everything to everyone. There's trending, there's mail, there's ads, videos. That's why I've never set Yahoo as my homepage. If you have, I think you might be crazy. I don't know.
Yeah.
Um, the complete,
Glutton for punishment.
yeah, maybe they have ADHD. I'm not really sure, but there's too much going on here. In comparison to my favorite, what is my homepage is Google, right? They haven't changed their homepage in ever, I don't think.
Yep.
They
Yeah.
do their little seasonal changes where they'll make Google, something relevant to like the holiday or something clever like that, but they've never really added anything other than or they've never really changed it outside of this. I guess they may added the microphone for voice search, but other than that, Google's been like a timeless homepage.
Well, they have the little dinosaur if you can't get a connection, right?
That is
So
true. I've played a lot of that in my day.
yeah. And remember, back to the primal mind's job is to conserve energy when you may need it for survival, right? And so thinking requires a lot of effort, especially when the thinker mind engages. It's I think the brain is 6 or 7% of the body mass and uses 25% of all the energy. So you got a big V8 that burns a lot of gas. You don't want to punch it very often because you rip through the tank. So the primal mind was built for survival and reproduction, and that's it. Not philosophy, not critical thinking, none of those things. And so when you blast all these options at people, it it immediately, the primal mind recoils and says, this is a waste of energy and we cannot afford that waste of energy. So when it's clean, simple, and one or a handful of choices, the primal mind, if visually engaged, will say, okay, um, let's dig further.
Yep. And I think the other really funny thing is, Google and Yahoo do a lot of similar stuff, right? Yahoo can be used as a search engine as well. Obviously, Google knows its bread and butter is being a search engine, but they both provide news articles, finance articles. They both have mail functions. But Google started with this, relays such a better, positive, singular focus, and then, provided those different services under, the positive lens. Where this Yahoo, I feel like, has just shotgun approached it, and not necessarily everything sticks.
Yep, exactly.
And now I know we've basically stuck kind of on the marketing side of things, but we also want to show you like a tangible or more, real world example that's not just anchored into marketing. This is a good example of two different waiting rooms. The top left one might be a little bit more familiar to you if you've been at a mechanic shop or just at a waiting room. People have not taken care of them for whatever reason. There's trash everywhere. Versus the bottom is another example of actually a waiting room here in Fort Collins that's designed after a family or a living room. And Derek, do you want to tell them a little bit more about kind of what is going on here?
Yeah. Um, and this is like a good blend of the thinker mind and then orienting what you find to the primal mind. So and I didn't know this, but 75 to 80% of all car service decisions, so who are, where they take the car, the family cars, anyone in the family, is decided by women. And so most mechanic shops that I've been to have looked like the one in the upper left. Um, you know, uh, Not something that would necessarily appeal. So what our client did is they built this, what you see in the lower right, um, to be a warm, friendly environment. So based on the research, um, and they then said, okay, how do we make this, and how do we make the primal mind feel safe and respected? And that's what they came up with.
Yeah, how unfortunate would it be? You could be the, town, city, state's best mechanic, but you have this terrible waiting room and people associate poor services with you because of this, visual display that they have to absorb the whole time they're waiting for their vehicle.
Right.
You're obviously doing such good work, but you're not wrapping it or communicating in a good visual manner.
That's right.
Um, so that kind of summarizes, our visual cues, visual stimulus, component of this, and we just kind of want to rewind and remind you of the primal and the thinking mind. This is all different things that can hopefully get you past the 800-pound gorilla so that the thinking mind can make a decision in your favor.
Yep.
um, we want you to be the couple or the group or the message, the concept that's getting the VIP status, getting into the club with, ushered in, like with everything Derrick said, bottle service, the couches, all the good stuff, so that the mind can greet you and then take into full consideration what you're saying without any negative aspects.
Yep.
Um, and just to remind you, that was just one of six of the things that we wanted to cover, but we know, limited time. We're obviously virtual, but we want, if you are interested in anything else along these lines, we'd be happy to talk to you, happy to discuss more of the other keys or the locks that get you into the thinking mind and past the primal mind.
Yep. Also, just want to thank you for your time. So hopefully this was helpful.
Yeah. Again, thank you for your time. I know you're watching this at any point because this year's format is just sending out all of the different presentations so you can watch them at your own will. So hopefully you found this informative and you can reach out to us if you're interested in learning more.